never really said, I've got 3 months to live to any of them or something like that. I've just sort of said, I've got cancer, we'll just have to keep on going and see what's going to happen.
In around December 2014, Mum called me. They think I've got cancer.
Probably not until I got home later that evening and Ange sort of sat me down and the real gravity of what we were dealing with really sort of came home.
It's a pretty frightening diagnosis.
It was a rare cancer, not well understood. 5-year survival rates were appalling.
And that's probably one of the hardest things, having to break it to the people that you love and that you know love you.
Once someone, obviously who's very close to you, gets diagnosed with something where they tell you there's no cure for it, it changes the way that you actually view all of your life.
You can see how helpless they feel. They can't take the pain away from you, they can't take the nausea.
A very organised person, you love your 9-to-5 life, you plan for the next 5 to 10 years, and then you get cancer and all of that is taken away from you and all you can focus on is the day you're in.
Because you feel so guilty because, you're causing all this stress.
I could tell, while she didn't explicitly say it, the mental toll was enormous.
Here's a beautiful woman in the prime of her life, 45 years of age, diagnosed with a cancer that there's no treatment for.
Trust me, when you're living with that chance, it's very real and it's very scary.
I have a very vivid memory of my Year 7 health class where our teacher asked us, what do you think of when you think of cancer? Not a lot came to my mind, but he happened to ask the kid sitting next to me, who responded with, I think of my mum because she died of breast cancer. That answer absolutely floored me. I had the best childhood imaginable, and for him to be about 12 or 13 and to be going through the nightmare already really, really threw me. Fast forward a few years and unfortunately we got a better understanding of what it does look like. The oncologist examined her and immediately said, it's not breast cancer, and she had different specialists come in, it's not in your ovaries. And I think it's important to think about from a patient's point of view what it's like sitting there with all these different specialists coming in the room, poking and prodding, trying to get to the bottom of it. It's because there's little knowledge and very few patients who have this form of cancer, so it's not obvious when someone presents with certain symptoms. The oncologist sat down and said, you've got medullary cancer of the thyroid. 3 words I'll never ever forget, and I hope I don't hear again, is end of life. My mum passed away at 59. She had the best years of her life still ahead of her, and they were really cruelly taken away. The aftershock is born off grief and anger, and they're two very powerful emotions that I think a lot of society tells us that we can't feel. You can't feel that, you can't be sad, you have to be happy all the time, and well, no, the nightmare is coming true. And you know what, I don't really want to feel happy. The aftershock being that ripple effect of a cancer diagnosis, how it reverberates into everyone's lives. And it doesn't stop. It's a ripple effect that keeps going.
The spread is massive. It's not just this one person, it's this whole community that grieves.
Mum now does her scans every 3 months. The week leading up to it is just immense stress and nerves of, in the space of an hour, my whole life could be switched on its head again.
Cancer's not just about the person going through it. I think the hardest thing for me about the whole thing is watching what it did to my family.
Her greatest fear was that the kids would not remember her. Ava had just turned 9, Liam had just turned 11, so they're very young. Knowing Anne, she would have had everything ready for every birthday for the next umpteen years, but Anne found herself in hospital with a tumour that was bleeding on her liver, and all that was ripped away from her. She only lived for another 3.5 weeks from that point forwards. Upon reflection, you look back and you go, the treatments were highly ineffectual. You could almost argue 100% ineffectual. Angela's cancer grew straight through her chemo, which is a very unexpected outcome for the doctors, because people like Ange never stood a chance.
Because of a lack of funding and therefore research, the 5-year survival rates haven't improved over the last 30 years. Collectively, they're killing more women than breast cancer and more men than prostate cancer. A big thing I realised when I actually started really paying attention to charities is that a lot of the creative and the branding and the messaging is very depressing. I wanted to create an organisation that was inviting and constructive and positive. The O in shock dips down a bit, and that's just a subtle nod to the bump in the road. Life is going along like this, and then you get the diagnosis, and hopefully it can go back up again.
It's particularly difficult to get funding for relatively rare diseases or sometimes very new diseases. Medical research is actually really expensive, and people like me, so career researchers, spend a lot of our time writing grants to get funding to support the staff in my lab, to buy equipment and the reagents and other items that we need.
The number one rule for us is definitely that everything needs to be donated, which means all the funding that we receive goes directly where it needs to go, and that's into high mortality rate cancer research.
The work that Aftershock has been doing with Suze has been critical and very important for us to actually gather some very important data and write some papers that will in turn allow us to apply for much larger NHMRC grants and certainly multi-center grants. So, an investment of $250,000 can turn potentially into a $2.5 million grant to really do patient-changing or outcome-changing research.
You can take it to the medical board and say, I found this with this. If you give me this, I can turn it into this. So it can just grow, all from that one donation at the beginning.
I can't underestimate the importance of grassroots community organisations in seed funding research. And I think one of the great examples of that is the era through the 80s and early 1990s of HIV research. The amazing efforts of members of the community that were affected translated from a disease that was almost universally fatal into one that people could now live with and manage, such that we almost never see that sort of scenario again.
We're collecting streams of data which then can help us teach an algorithm that can then make a more accurate diagnosis of patients. We're really at the beginnings of being able to understand each patient individually and then tailor the best therapy for the patient.
The only thing that's going to give them the tools that they need is more research. Off the back of awareness, then you can get traction and get some movement in this space.
A big event of ours is Tidy's Tour, where my brother, his way of helping was getting on his bike and riding across the country from Perth to Melbourne, and he did that in 21 days, which is 3,500 kilometres, and it raised over 40 grand for us. Every single person they met across the Nullarbor, from Perth to Adelaide to Melbourne, was affected by cancer. No one is immune to it. Everyone is vulnerable, and that's why we do what we do.
I think there's a lot of hope for cancer now. I think if I had this cancer 6 years ago, I would not be alive.
Mum said to me so many times, I think the biggest thing she's struggled with is the fact that she will not see weddings and grandchildren. And I think the nicest thing was we were driving down to Geelong for Ben's wedding, and I said to her, how amazing is this? The first thing you said to me when you were diagnosed was, I'm never going to see a wedding. And now you're at your wedding, and I guarantee you'll have a grandchild in a year or something. So
Cancer's not all bad. It changes the way you look at life, and it does make you reassess everything. Every day is precious. I basically recovered from the cancer, but then 17 years after my initial diagnosis, I developed esophageal cancer as a result of all the radiation that I'd had to my chest, and then I had major surgery to remove my esophagus. I think we were all a bit shocked when she said to us, there's a 5% risk of death from the surgery. It's bigger than a heart transplant. And 5% might not sound like a lot, but when you wheeled in to the surgery on that day, I thought, well, I really don't want to be the 1 in 20, but someone has to be, and it will be wonderful to think of a future where that statistic didn't exist anymore.
I think Mum would be stoked about my family coming together in creating the Aftershock. I think a big fear for hers was us not being okay, and not that we are okay, because we would give everything and anything ever back to have 5 minutes with her, let alone a lifetime. But seeing us work with all the medical team, all the different family and friends, she certainly didn't pass away for nothing. They're represented through the Aftershock. That just provides a lot more motivation to ensure people like them aren't in my mum's position and new people who are diagnosed aren't in that position either, and that they can enjoy that different outlook on life. And we're only going to get there if we continue to receive the generous support we already do from our donors. We are funded by each and every fundraiser and donor who chooses to donate to the Aftershock. So when I say every single dollar counts, I mean it. And I really look forward to a point in a few years' time where we can say we now have touched and affected every single cancer that we focus on.